The world was watching quietly, unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding behind closed doors in Ottawa. The Canadian defense establishment had been in deep discussions for months, meetings so secretive that even senior officers were left guessing. The US expected Canada to follow the same path as always, loyal to American defense technology, predictable in its purchases, and safely within the Pentagon's sphere. But this time, Canada was about to make a move no one saw coming. It began with whispers, talks of frustration, endless delays, skyrocketing costs, and doubts surrounding the American F-35 program. Canadian officials had been promised a jet that could dominate the skies, but what they got was a string of technical issues and budget nightmares. In the shadows of those disappointments, a different name started to circulate. Saab, a Swedish company known not for power projection, but for precision, independence, and innovation. The Gripen E, a sleek, almost unassuming fighter, started appearing in confidential reports sent to the Canadian Parliament. Engineers marveled at its cost efficiency. Pilots admired its agility. Strategists were intrigued by its independence from American control. But what truly caught their attention was something the US never expected. The Gripen could operate without relying on American software locks or political permission. For the first time, Canada could own its sky. One evening, a closed-door meeting took place between senior Canadian officials and a quiet delegation from Sweden. The Americans had no idea. Inside that room, something remarkable happened. The Swedes presented the Gripen E's full potential. Live combat data, electronic warfare capabilities, maintenance simplicity, and a price tag that undercut the F-35 by nearly half. More importantly, they showed how the Gripen could integrate seamlessly into NATO systems while still giving Canada full sovereignty. For a country tired of being in America's shadow, it was an irresistible offer. When news of Canada's internal review leaked, Washington was stunned. Defense analysts scrambled to verify the rumors. The Pentagon couldn't believe that a close ally, a member of NORAD, was considering turning its back on the US fighter monopoly. American media called it unthinkable. But within Canada, something had shifted. The idea of independence, true defense autonomy, was growing louder. Behind the scenes, US defense contractors launched a subtle campaign to stop the deal. Political pressure mounted. Threats of trade implications and defense complications began circulating. But the Canadians remained silent. They knew they were being watched. In Ottawa's corridors of power, a few decision-makers were quietly finalizing something historic. Then, one cold morning, a single document was signed, a letter of intent, discreet but monumental. Canada was preparing to partner with Sweden's Saab to evaluate the Gripen E for national defense. It wasn't a full rejection of the US, but it was enough to send shockwaves across Washington. Pentagon insiders were furious. "This can't happen," one senior official was quoted saying. "Canada is our defense neighbor. This would rewrite the rules. The US military immediately ordered a confidential review of the Gripen. They wanted to know what exactly made this jet so appealing. The results were unexpected. The Gripen wasn't just cheaper, it was smarter. Its open architecture allowed updates without US permission. Its electronic warfare suite rivaled top American systems, and its ability to take off from highways, refuel in minutes, and be maintained by a small crew made it a survival machine. In Arctic conditions, Canada's toughest environment, the Gripen excelled. That discovery terrified US analysts. Because if Canada proved the Gripen was a better fit, other allies might follow. It wasn't just about one deal. It was about the beginning of a fracture in American air power influence. And deep down, the Pentagon knew. The Swedish jet might just be the key that unlocked independence for smaller nations long bound by US military control. The shock was real, and it was only the beginning. Across the Atlantic, in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon was in crisis mode. The idea that a NATO member might break away from American defense dominance was unacceptable. Meetings were called at lightning speed. Emails were sent to Ottawa. Some polite, others not so much. Behind the diplomatic smiles, there was fear. If Canada chose the Gripen, the entire US fighter export structure could begin to crumble. Billions in contracts, decades of influence, all threatened by one Swedish aircraft. Meanwhile, in Sweden, Saab's engineers were quietly celebrating. They had never expected to reach this far. For decades, they were seen as underdogs, brilliant, but overshadowed by American giants like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. But now, a North American nation was seriously considering their jet. Inside Saab's facility in Linköping, the engineers worked through the night, refining data packages, improving simulations, and preparing to prove something extraordinary. That the Gripen could outperform the mighty F-35 in real-world conditions. Canadian test pilots were flown to Sweden under secrecy. They trained with Swedish instructors, flew the Gripen E in Arctic-like weather, and returned with silent amazement. One of them later told a colleague, "It feels alive, not like a computer." The Gripen was responsive, agile, and easy to maintain. Every system was designed with simplicity in mind, a philosophy lost in the complexity of American stealth jets. And yet, it could fight. Hard. When internal reports from those test flights reached Ottawa, the conclusion was startling. The Gripen had surpassed expectations. It could scramble faster, survive harsher conditions, and cost less per hour to fly than any Western fighter. For Canada, it wasn't just about performance. It was about freedom. Freedom from dependency. Freedom from approvals. Freedom from pressure. But the United States didn't plan to watch quietly. An emergency delegation was sent to Ottawa, including senior officials and defense executives. They came with promises, upgrades, technology sharing, political incentives. They told Canadian leaders that abandoning the F-35 would weaken continental defense unity. Yet the Canadians knew the truth. Unity had long been one-sided. The US had dictated and Canada had complied. But now, for once, Canada had leverage. In a hidden government hangar near Cold Lake, 2 prototypes were brought in. One F-35, one Gripen E. For weeks, Canadian analysts compared their systems. The Gripen's modular design stunned the engineers. Software updates could be done locally, without depending on any foreign code. The F-35, on the other hand, required constant synchronization with American servers, meaning that even in an emergency, Washington could theoretically control or limit its operations. That realization changed everything. Then came the leak. A confidential photo surfaced online, showing a Gripen parked beside a Canadian flag. It spread like wildfire. American media outlets exploded with speculation. "Has Canada betrayed the US?" one headline screamed. The Pentagon demanded clarification, but Ottawa remained silent. Behind that silence, decisions were being made that would echo across the defense world. A week later, a mysterious convoy left Ottawa, headed north. Inside were Canadian Air Force officials, defense ministers, and a few Swedish representatives. Their destination, a remote airfield used for cold weather testing. There, under a frozen sky, the Gripen E was put through trials no fighter had ever faced before. Sub-zero starts, short runway takeoffs, and electronic warfare jamming in simulated conflict zones. The results were nothing short of shocking. The Gripen not only survived, it dominated. At the same time, US satellites monitored every movement. Intelligence analysts filed reports describing the Canadian tests as strategic rebellion. Washington feared that if Canada officially partnered with Sweden, it would send a message to Europe, Asia, and beyond, that small nations could rise without American permission. And that idea, more than the jet itself, was the real threat. Back in Ottawa, pressure was building. The Prime Minister faced two choices: stay loyal to tradition or make history. Advisors argued late into the night. One side warned that angering the US could risk trade and diplomatic fallout. The other side whispered that this was Canada's moment, a chance to redefine its identity as a truly independent power. The Gripen had become more than a fighter jet. It was now a symbol of rebellion, innovation, and quiet defiance. Then came an unexpected twist. During a high-level meeting, a document was placed on the Prime Minister's desk. It was an official US counteroffer, packed with promises, discounts, and guarantees of strategic partnership. It was everything Canada had once wanted. But now, it felt hollow, because the choice before them was no longer about money or technology. It was about control. As the Prime Minister stared at the paper, he asked a simple question. If we choose Gripen, what happens next? The answer came from a defense advisor who had seen both jets up close. He said quietly, "Then the world will finally realize that the sky doesn't belong to America alone." The room fell silent. The decision was almost made. But before the world could know, Canada had one final test to conduct. A test that would make even the Pentagon question its own air power legacy. The air was crisp and cold that morning as the last test began. Somewhere in the frozen north, a secret Canadian airbase came alive. Engineers whispered in the biting wind. Cameras were calibrated, and radar stations hummed. Two aircraft stood side by side, their canopies gleaming under the pale Arctic sun. The American F-35 and the Swedish Gripen E. What was about to happen wasn't just another trial. It was a quiet showdown between two worlds. One built on control, and one built on independence. Canadian pilots had been briefed for weeks. They would fly both jets through identical mission profiles: low-altitude runs, high-speed intercepts, electronic warfare simulations, and cold start procedures. The observers were few but powerful: representatives from Sweden, Canada's Defense Ministry, and a handful of NATO allies curious enough to watch silently. Not a single American was invited. The first round began. The F-35 roared down the icy runway, its engine howling like thunder. Its sensors lit up the sky, detecting everything in range. But then came the first problem. A minor system error delayed takeoff. Technicians rushed in to fix it. The Gripen E, meanwhile, stood quietly, waiting. When its turn came, the Swedish jet took off in half the distance, climbing fast and smooth. It danced through the cold air like it was born there. Hours passed. The tests grew more demanding. mid-flight refueling simulations, rapid data transfers, jamming attacks. Each trial exposed something new. The F-35 was powerful, yes, but complex to manage. Every issue required a line of code, a technician, or a remote authorization. The Gripen, in contrast, was lean, adaptable, almost instinctive. It could reboot systems mid-air without ground support. It could fly from highways, refuel in minutes, and adapt to battlefield chaos in real time. The Canadian observers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Then came the final challenge. An electronic warfare duel. Both jets entered a simulated combat zone filled with radar threats and jamming systems. The F-35's stealth technology worked beautifully until its sensors were hit by a software glitch triggered by environmental interference. Its radar feed flickered, then froze for several seconds. The Gripen E, however, responded instantly, adapting its countermeasures on its own. Its system, built for flexibility, began hunting the source of the signal. Within moments, it had identified, jammed, and digitally killed every simulated radar on the map. The observers were silent. The Gripen had just done what few thought possible. It had outmaneuvered the most advanced stealth fighter on Earth. When the test ended, the pilots landed and stepped out. No one spoke, but the data spoke for them. On paper, the Gripen had performed beyond expectations. Cheaper, faster to maintain, easier to operate, and nearly equal in combat capability. Canada had its answer. That night, in Ottawa, a confidential report was placed on the Prime Minister's desk. The findings were undeniable. The Gripen wasn't just a viable choice. It was a statement. A statement that Canada could protect itself, not as a junior partner, but as an equal power. The Prime Minister read the report in silence. Then, slowly, he smiled. The next morning, an announcement shook the world. Canada officially declared its partnership with Sweden's Saab for an extensive evaluation and potential procurement of the Gripen E. The words were careful, diplomatic, but everyone understood the message. The United States was blindsided. For the first time in decades, a close ally had publicly chosen a different path. The Pentagon was in disbelief. Calls flooded the Canadian Defense Ministry. "Is this final?" reporters shouted. "Has Canada betrayed the alliance?" But the Canadians stood firm. They released a simple statement. Canada's choice is guided by what best serves Canadian defense and sovereignty. That line spread across the globe, shared, debated, admired, and feared.